It was one of the best German tanks in World War II. No wonder the shape of the Panther is well known by everyone interested in military history. It was created after the shock the Soviet T-34s caused to the German army. Although not big in numbers and initially plagued with problems, it was still a very effective tank. So let's see how this iconic vehicle was born. When Hitler decided to invade the Soviet Union in 1941 during Operation Barbarossa, they were expecting the Russian army, and especially the tank force, to be obsolete, and something that won't cause much trouble for the German war machine. Though on paper the Soviet Union's tank force was enormous, with more than 23,000 units, more than 4 times the size of the German Panzer force, which included only 5,200 tanks. But most of the Soviet tanks were older designs. The training of the tank crews and the armored tactics were both lacking as well. Although the Germans used the Panzer III and IV tanks in the invasion, which were both mid-1930s designs, they still thought these were superior to anything the Russians could throw in the battles. In the first encounters in the operation, this proved to be true, as the German Panzers easily dispatched the old Soviet T-26 and BT tanks, and even the heavier T-28 and T-35s. But it only took one day for them to realize how much they underestimated the Soviet tank development, as on 23rd of July they have met the first T-34 and KV-1 tanks. The KV-1 in particular was almost impenetrable to the German 37 and 50mm anti-tank rounds. If you're interested in the history of the Soviet KV tanks, I already made a video on them. I recommend you watch it. See the link in the description or at the end of this video. The other surprise, the T-34, however, was used in greater numbers, and though it had its problems and the Soviet tank forces coordination was lackluster, the tank itself was seen by the Germans as a great leap in tank design. The T-34 had a strong combination of maneuverability thanks to its V12 diesel engine, good firepower with its 76mm gun, and good protection thanks to its sloped armor. The Germans quickly realized the T-34 surpassed their Panzer III and IV models, so they need to come up with a more advanced design. By 1941, actually there was a project underway to replace the Panzer III and IVs with a 24-ton new tank. This was the VK20 series. Daimler, MAN and Krupp all entered their designs, and Daimler was awarded the contract. By late 1941, the design was almost finished, but the events on the Eastern Front changed the course of the development. In October 1941, General Heinz Guderian, commander of the 2nd Panzer Army, sent for a commission to examine the T-34 tanks on the Eastern Front and assess the steps to counter them. The commission arrived at the Eastern Front on 18th of November, talked to panzer repair companies and examined some knocked out T-34s. They gathered a few points of advantages from the Soviet tanks. First, the sloped armor, then the suspension and wide tracks, creating low ground pressure, and finally, the long barrel gun, which until that point was avoided in German tank designs. Guderian pointed out that the new tank designs need to be more maneuverable, with wider tracks, more heavily armed to be able to penetrate the heavy Soviet tanks, and more heavily armored as well. This led to the dropping of the complete VK20 program, and 4 companies, Henschel, Porsche, MAN and Daimler, were given the task to design a new 30-35-ton tank under the VK30 project name. The Henschel design was considered outdated and dropped, while Porsche after a while withdrew from the project. 2 companies stayed as competitors, Daimler and MAN, both given contracts to create prototypes. The Daimler prototype was very much influenced by the T-34. It featured sloped armor, a forward-mounted turret, rear-mounted transmission, and a diesel engine. The MAN prototype was a more conventional design, with transmission in the front, central-mounted turret, and a petrol engine. Because of the front-mounted transmission and the driveshaft running at the bottom, this prototype was taller than the Daimler one. The 2 designs were reviewed from January 1942, and for a very long time it looked like the Daimler design will be the winner. Even Hitler himself considered it to be better. But in May 1942, this has changed. The commission appointed to review the designs found the MAN design to be better based on the events in the war. They needed to put the new tanks in production as fast as possible. So their main reasons were that the Daimler design would have needed a brand new turret and engine to be designed and manufactured, while the MAN design used an existing turret and the same engine the Tiger tank used. Other reasons for favoring the MAN designs were that the Daimler design couldn't fit existing turrets even if they wanted to, as the turret ring on their design was smaller, and also there was a fear that their design has too much of a resemblance to the T-34, so friendly fire might occur. If you paid attention, you might wonder, why did I say the MAN design used an existing turret, when it looks like it has the well-known Panther turret on it? Well, to explain that, we need to go back a bit in time to 1941 again, when Rheinmetall received a contract to develop a new 75mm tank cannon against the new and heavier Soviet tanks. This was the designated cannon for the future Tiger tank. When the Tiger project was changed to use the 88mm gun, the 75mm gun and the turret design was left unused, and later became the Panther turret after some redesign. The gun itself, the famous 75mm KWK-42, was originally planned to be 60 calibers long, but later it was increased in length to 70 calibers and standardized as 7.5cm KWK-42 L/70. Now we can get back to the Panther development after this little detour. So in May 1942, the decision was made to go with the MAN design, as it could be put to production faster. But Hitler, when reviewing the plans, requested some changes, for instance the frontal armor to be increased to 80mm. With the Panther's front armor plate angled at 55 degrees, this 80mm armor plate actually became effectively almost 140mm of armor to defeat, so its effective frontal armor was even better than the Tiger's. In its final production form, the Panther weighed almost 45 tons, thanks to the increase in armor thickness. On the hull front, it featured an 80mm thick upper plate and a 60mm thick lower plate. The side of the hull was 40mm thick. The front of the turret was the most armored part of the tank, with 100mm thickness. The side and rear of the turret were both 45mm thick. Despite its weight, the Panther was still a fairly agile tank, thanks to its Maybach V12 petrol engine, producing 650 horsepower. On paved roads, it could be faster than the Panzer IV versions, however this changed off-road, and the Panther's weight held it back. On roads, its maximum speed was 55 km an hour, but off-road it was only capable of 15 km an hour. The Panther's armament consisted of a 75mm KWK-42 L/70 main gun and two MG-34 machine guns. This 75mm high-velocity gun was one of the most feared tank guns of World War II. It could knock out Allied tanks from very long distances. Its effective range was around 1.1–1.3 km. Prototype VK30-02M. This was the first prototype model. The Panther's production model's naming was a bit confusing, as it didn't follow alphabetical order. The first production model was the Panther D version. The D version initially used phased-hardened armor on the front, which on later versions was dropped as ballistic capped shells became more standard, so there was no reason to use phase-hardened plates. The D variant is recognizable by the letterbox machine gun port, the driver's port, and the drum-like commander's cupola. 850 units were built between January and September 1943. The Panther A version featured many small changes, but many of the early A models still showed features from the D models, so visual identification is not always straightforward. The most notable differences are the more streamlined commander's cupola and the armored ball mount for the hull machine gun, though this was only introduced in November 1943. Early A models still used the letterbox style opening. The early A models also featured the pistol ports on the side of the turret. On later models, this was dropped. 2,200 units were built between August 1943 and May 1944. The G variant was a bigger redesign. It featured a modified chassis and some other small changes. The main difference was the side armor above the tracks. On the D and A models, it was a 40mm thick plate angled at 40 degrees. On the G models, this was changed to a 50mm thick plate angled at 29 degrees. To compensate for the weight increase caused by the thicker side armor, the lower front armor plate was changed to 50mm thickness from 60mm, and the belly plates changed from 30mm to 25mm. The main reason behind the redesign was to simplify and further speed up production. On the G model, the viewport for the driver was deleted too, as it was considered a weak spot. Now the driver could only navigate through the periscopes. On the turret, the most notable difference on the later G models is the new gun mantlet. With the early round mantlets, there were several occasions when the enemy shells ricocheted downwards, penetrating the thin 60mm roof of the chassis and killing crew members. To prevent this, a new type of mantlet was designed, featuring a chin guard. Though at the end of the war, Allied troops found both mantlet types were still in production in parallel when visiting the factories. Some of the later G models were fitted with infrared searchlights. 2,961 were built between March 1944 and April 1945. A late war planned upgrade of the Panther was the F version with a smaller, narrower turret. Some of these were tested, but the end of the war prevented its mass production. The Panther II was a bigger planned redesign of the platform with stronger armor and many other upgrades, but only 2 prototypes were built. Its production was also prevented by the end of the war. The most well-known subversion of the Panther is the tank destroyer based on the Panther G chassis, the so-called Panther, featuring the 88mm PaK-43 cannon. Also worth mentioning this interesting abomination, a Panzer IV turret on a Panther chassis. Most probably the turret didn't work and it was used as a command vehicle. The Panthers were seen as a main component for Operation Citadel on summer 1943. So much so that the operation was delayed several times until the troops received more of the new tanks. As much as the commanders had high hopes for the new tanks, their technical problems and the lack of crew training caused major problems. At the Battle of Kursk on 5th of July, the German forces have 184 Panthers operational for the battle. 2 days later, the number of the operational Panthers was only 40. Almost half of them suffered mechanical breakdowns or engine fires. Despite the problems, the Panther proved its combat effectiveness, as it could destroy any Soviet tank from long distances, and racked up an impressive kill ratio. The highest number of operational Panthers on the Eastern Front was 522 in September 1944. In June 1944, at the time of the Allied landings, there were only 2 Panther regiments in France, with a little more than 150 Panthers. By August, this number was raised to 432. The Panther could use its excellent gun and armor advantage against the Allied Shermans when it met the Allies in open country. But when meeting the British troops, it faced the deadly 17-pounder guns, used by anti-tank regiments or mounted on the Achilles tank destroyer or the Sherman Firefly models. While it had an advantage in the open country, in the thick hedgerows, the Panther was in a disadvantage against the more mobile Shermans. It was too big, wide and heavy to fight effectively in between the hedges or in the narrow streets of the little towns. Though the German command sent new Panther brigades to France, trying to stop the Allied advance, they fared badly, as the new crews were badly trained and inexperienced. Many Panthers were lost in the Battle of Araucourt, even though the Panthers faced mainly Shermans equipped with only 75mm guns. The Panthers participated in the Ardennes offensive in December 1944, where they once again excelled at destroying the enemy forces at long ranges, but ran into difficulties and suffered many losses fighting in the small towns. Here, at the Battle of the Bulge, 10 Panthers were disguised as M10 tank destroyers with additional plates welded on them and painted to US colors and markings. They were however noticed and destroyed. The Germans also used Panther turrets on fixed fortifications from 1943, both in North Africa and in Europe. The Red Army deployed captured Panthers to combat, but unlike the Panzer IIIs and IVs, these were too rare and complex to repair, so they just used them until they broke down. The Hungarian forces received 5 Panthers in July 1944, then another dozen in late 1944, which were designated to Romania, but Romania switched sides by then. Interesting fact that because the German High Command turned down the Hungarian request to buy the manufacturing right to the Panther, they started developing their own similar tank, influenced by the Panther and the Soviet T-34. Its name was 44M Tash, and it looked very similar to the early Daimler Panther prototype, but they never went to production because of the end of the war. In 1946, Romania received 13 Panthers from the Soviet Union, and they remained in service until 1950. In France, they managed to salvage and repair 50 Panthers after the war, and they were in service until 1947. Despite all of its problems, the Panther was one of the best German tanks in World War II. Many German tankers thought it was better than the Tiger. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like and in the comments let me know if there's any interesting events or vehicles you'd like to see.